Hello, economic warriors, debt dodgers, and fiscal fiends. Welcome back to Boss Economics World, where we slice through the government's economic baloney like a hot knife through taxpayer tears. I'm your host, the guy who's been screaming into the void about reckless government mismanagement since the days of dial-up internet. Today, we're diving headfirst into the steaming pile of economic absurdity that is President Trump's One Big Beautiful Bill Act, a multi-trillion-dollar monstrosity that just squeaked through the House on May 22, 2025, by a razor-thin 215-214 vote. Buckle up, folks, because this is a masterclass in how to tank an economy while wearing a red tie and a fake smile. Let's go. At first glance, this bill looks like a shiny gift-wrapped present for the average Joe and Jane: tax cuts extended, a higher state and local tax, SALT, deduction, and even a little sweetener like exempting tips and overtime pay from taxes. Trump's out there on Truth Social, popping champagne and calling it the most significant piece of legislation that will ever be signed in the history of our country. Oh, bless his heart. And sure, the GOP cheerleaders in the House were high-fiving like they just won the Super Bowl. But folks, let me tell you something, this isn't a touchdown. It's a fumble into a pit of quicksand, and we're all about to sink. Here's the deal, this bill is a $4 trillion increase in the U.S. debt ceiling, designed to avoid a default that the Treasury Department says could hit as early as August or September 2025. That's right, we're once again holding the economy hostage to avoid the government's favorite game of fiscal chicken. And while Trump's busy taking victory laps, the real story is what's lurking beneath the surface, a toxic cocktail of inequality, reckless spending, and economic mismanagement that's setting us up for a recession so bad, it'll make the 2008 financial crisis look like a bad hair day. Let's peel back the layers of this economic onion, shall we? And fair warning, it's gonna make you cry. First up, let's talk about that $4 trillion debt ceiling hike. Now, I know what you're thinking, oh, it's just a ceiling, we'll deal with it later. Wrong. This isn't a ceiling, it's a trapdoor to fiscal hell. The U.S. national debt is already sitting at a jaw-dropping $35 trillion as of mid-2025, according to the U.S. Treasury Department. That's over 120% of GDP, a level we haven't seen since World War II. And here's the kicker, the Congressional Budget Office, CBO, projects that this bill will add another $1.5 trillion to the deficit over the next decade, even without accounting for interest payments on that debt, which are skyrocketing thanks to the Federal Reserve's battle against inflation. Speaking of inflation, let's not forget the Fed's been hiking interest rates like they're trying to set a new personal record. As of May 2025, the federal funds rate is hovering at 5.5%, the highest since 2001, according to the Federal Reserve Bank of St. Louis. That means borrowing costs are through the roof, and servicing the national debt is eating up more of the budget than ever. In fiscal year 2024, net interest payments on the debt hit $892 billion, more than we spent on defense, per the CBO. And with this bill, we're just pouring more fuel on the fire. Moody's, by the way, isn't buying the hype, they just downgraded the U.S. credit rating from AA1 to AA2 in April 2025, citing unsustainable fiscal trajectories. Translation, bond investors are getting jittery, and when they panic, we all pay the price. Now, let's talk about those tax cuts. On the surface, extending Trump's 2017 tax cut sounds like a win for everyone, right? Wrong again. According to the Tax Policy Center, the top 1% of earners, folks making over $1 million a year, will pocket 45% of the benefits from these extensions, while the bottom 60% of Americans will see just 13%. And don't even get me started on the SALT deduction hike from $10,000 to $40,000. Sure, it sounds great for folks in high-tax states like New York and California, but here's the catch, it's phased out for anyone making over $500,000. So, who benefits? The upper middle class and the wealthy, that's who. The average worker. You're lucky if you get a few extra bucks to buy a coffee. And while the rich are swimming in tax breaks, what's happening to the poor? Oh, just cuts to safety net programs like food stamps and Medicaid. The bill speeds up Medicaid work requirements to December 2026, which the Kaiser Family Foundation estimates could kick 3 million low-income Americans off their health coverage by 2028. Meanwhile, the Urban Institute projects that cuts to food stamps will push 1.2 million people, including 400,000 children, into food insecurity. But hey, at least Elon Musk and his billionaire buddies are getting their tax breaks, right? This isn't economic policy, it's a heist. Let's not forget the broader context here. The U.S. economy is already reeling from Trump's tariff obsession. In 2024, he slapped a 60% tariff on Chinese goods and a 20% tariff on everything else, calling it the greatest economic defense strategy in history. The result? A disaster. According to the National Bureau of Economic Research, these tariffs have already cost U.S. consumers $50 billion a year in higher prices, while tanking exports by 15%. The manufacturing sector, which Trump claims to champion, has shed 200,000 jobs since mid-2024, per the Bureau of Labor Statistics, as global supply chains reroute away from the US. And now, with this bill, we're doubling down on debt to paper over the cracks in an economy that's already on life support. Brilliant. Oh, and let's not ignore the environmental cherry on this economic dumpster fire. The bill gets clean energy tax credits, with most EV credits, including for Tesla, gone by the end of 2025. Instead, we're getting tax breaks for fossil fuels and auto loan interest on gas guzzlers. Look, I'm no tree hugger, but even I can see the writing on the wall. The International Energy Agency, IEA, warns that global carbon emissions need to fall by 45% by 2030 to avoid catastrophic climate change, but US emissions are now projected to rise by 10% over the same period, thanks in part to policies like this. And guess what? Extreme weather events, fueled by climate change, are already costing the US economy $150 billion a year, according to NOAA. But hey, who needs a planet when you've got a tax cut, right? Now, let's get to the heart of the matter, the government's role in this economic train wreck. Look, I'm not here to bash one party or the other. I'm here to bash bad policy, and this bill is a textbook example. The Trump administration and its GOP allies are selling this as a growth plan, but it's nothing more than a sugar high for the economy. The CBO estimates that the bill will boost GDP by a measly 0.4% in 2026, before dragging growth down by 0.9% by 2030 as debt and interest payments choke the economy. Meanwhile, income inequality is set to hit levels not seen since the Gilded Age, with the Gini coefficient, a measure of inequality, projected to rise from 0.42 in 2024 to 0.48 by 2030, per the World Bank. And let's not forget the political circus that got us here. Trump's strong-arm tactics, threatening GOP holdouts with ultimate betrayal, are straight out of a mob movie. House Speaker Mike Johnson was juggling demands from high-tax state lawmakers, hardline conservatives, and swing district Republicans like a circus clown on a unicycle. The result? A bill that's less about economic strategy and more about political survival. And the Senate? Oh, they're gearing up to make it even worse, with some GOP senators pushing for permanent tax cuts for businesses, because apparently, the rich haven't gotten enough handouts yet. Here's the million-dollar question, or should I say, the $4 trillion question. Is this bill going to tip us into a recession? Well, folks, the signs aren't good. The Conference Board's leading economic index has been flashing red for 6 months straight, with a 0.7% decline in April 2025 alone. Consumer confidence, per the University of Michigan, is at its lowest since the pandemic, thanks to inflation still running at 4.2% year-over-year, per the Bureau of Labor Statistics. And with bond yield spiking, the 10-year Treasury note hit 4.8% in May 2025, per the Federal Reserve, the risk of a debt crisis is higher than ever. If history is any guide, we're in trouble. Remember the 1980s, when Reagan's tax cuts and military spending spree led to a debt explosion and a recession in 1990? Or the 2000s, when Bush's tax cuts and wars pushed the deficit through the roof, setting the stage for the Great Recession? This bill is like a greatest hits album of bad economic ideas, remixed for 2025. And when the music stops, it's the average American who's left holding the bag. So, what's the takeaway, folks? This bill is a masterclass in government mismanagement, a reckless, debt-fueled, inequality-worsening, climate-ignoring disaster that's setting us up for a recession of epic proportions. It's not about growth, it's about politics. It's not about the little guy, it's about the big guy. And it's not about the future, it's about the next election cycle. Here at Boss Economics World, we're not just here to complain, we're here to demand better. We need a government that prioritizes sustainable growth over short-term gimmicks, that invests in people instead of handing out tax breaks to billionaires, and that faces the reality of climate change instead of burying its head in the sand. Until then, keep your wallets tight and your eyes open, because this economic roller coaster is about to go off the rails. That's all for today, economic warriors. If you liked this video, smash that like button harder than Trump smashes the debt ceiling. Subscribe, ring the bell, and share this with every taxpayer who deserves to know the truth. And remember, the government might be clueless, but you don't have to be. This is Boss Economics World, signing off.